Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak to this conference on a topic that I deeply care about, which is energy efficiency, and a topic that is not very often talked about when discussing climate change. So thank you very much for this opportunity. If we can put the slide on the screen, I would start my presentation. Here we are. So I should warn you, because you said to me that the data is boring, that the first half of the presentation will be quite data focused in order to set the scene. I would encourage the viewer, if they haven't done so already, to put the live stream on a full screen, because we're going to go through a few facts and graphs and figures, and then we move on to the main message of the audit. So first things first, I would like to start this presentation by introducing the two main arguments in favor of energy efficiency policy. In other words, I would like to answer the question that you see on the slide: why do we need to conserve energy? I would like to convince you, now that you've been convinced that climate change is a major issue, that energy conservation is an important part of the solution. The first reason why energy efficiency is important is because it contributes to reducing greenhouse gas emission, thereby limiting the risk of dangerous level of climate change. As you can see on the bar chart, energy production and use accounts for roughly 79% of EU emission. In other words, any progress on reducing our emissions will necessarily require tackling the way we produce and consume energy. There are other sectors like waste in the industrial process and forestry, but 80% of it's about energy. If we break it down by sectoral use, sorry, I need to go back. We see that the heaviest sectoral emission comes from energy supply and transport. Both of them represent about half our emissions, followed by industry and buildings. A lot of the debate on the energy and climate change is focused on energy production. This is what we call the energy mix. It simply means how much energy comes from fossil fuel, how much energy comes from nuclear, how much energy comes from renewables. It's a debate focused on the carbon content of energy production. Energy efficiency is a bit different. It asks a different question. Is there a way we can consume less energy? So it's very much a complementary solution to changing the energy mix. All other things equals, the energy efficiency simply means that if we are less hungry for energy, we will reduce our emission. The second reason I would like to mention is the fact that we need to conserve energy simply because we do not have enough of it. Primary production of energy in the EU is around half of what we consume. A bit of good news is that there is a steady increase in the production of renewable energy. So you see the red arrow on the slide. The energy source that increases the most in the EU is renewable energy. But other than that, most energy production is going down in a very clear trend. You can see the three big red arrows. It shows a big decrease in natural gas, in coal and oil production. We have very little oil in the EU anyway, less than 4%. Norway is a bit different, of course. On the surface, this may look like good news. After all, if we reduce our energy production from fossil fuel, looks like a good thing. But it's not the reason why our production is decreasing. It's simply because Europe does not have that much energy reserve in any case. We are faced with the limitation of what we can extract from the ground. Which leads me to my next slide, which could be summarized in one sentence. What we do not produce, we import. In the EU, 55% of our energy is imported. The demand for energy worldwide is steadily increasing, and it's not going to stop increasing for a long time. Therefore, getting energy is a real challenge, and it puts the EU economy, in all of the EU, it puts a strong constraint on our economic development, because getting energy is increasingly difficult. The decrease of primary energy production in the EU that we've seen on the last slide in the past decades has resulted in increased imports. The quantity of imported natural gas, for example, more than doubled over the period 1990-2018, making it the second highest imported energy product. But in general, as you can see, oil continues to be the most significant energy sources and our biggest import for the European economy. It represents around 2/3 of energy imports. We import, just for reference, around 8% of coal. To conclude, we need energy efficiency improvement to mitigate climate change, to reduce our CO2 emission, and to reduce our energy dependency. So it's good for climate, but it is also a good business decision because we rely quite heavily on import of energy, meaning that it's purely a cost for our economy. There are two other reasons that we could mention on top of the two ones that I just presented, which is that energy efficiency policy tend to reduce energy poverty, which is of course a good thing from a social standpoint, and it also tend to decrease air pollution. So there's also a lot of advantage in terms of health policy. The second part of my presentation will be a very quick, brief overview of where we are at EU level, because this is the level that the European Court of Auditors tend to look at in terms of reaching the EU climate change objectives. You are probably aware of the 2020 target of reducing the EU greenhouse gases emission by 20% by 2020 compared to 1990s level. This is the first so-called 2020 target. On this chart, you can see the progress made so far. Here it is, the big red circle, and a projection of the future efforts needed for 2030 and 2050. The good news, which is good news, is that the EU has achieved its objective for 2020. We have collectively reduced our emission by more than 20%. But it needs a careful consideration. We managed indeed to reduce our emission by around 0.8% per year in the last 17 years. How we did it is a very complicated story and not the focus of my talk, but in brief, we benefited a lot from two factors. First was the deindustrialization of Eastern Europe, since the 90s, and the second was the economic crisis of 2008. My point here is not to say that no efforts were made or that it's not a success, simply to say that we did a lot of the easy stuff and we picked the low-hanging fruit. Now, looking ahead, beyond 2020, it's important to note two things, I believe. First, to reach the 2030 target, this is the red circle around 40%, and perhaps this figure will become 55% if a political agreement is agreed at the European level. We will need to reduce our emission by at least 1.4% per year. It means 70% faster, quicker than what we have done up to now. That's a very, very, very dramatic shift in the level of ambition year on year to reduce our emission. Beyond 2030, the emission target is possibly will be zero net emission by 2050. This would be compatible roughly with the Paris Agreement. This means that the emission reduction rate will need to outpace historic level by 3 times in order to achieve this objective. So the EU target will not be achieved without significant additional effort. Which leads me to the energy efficiency, the topic of the day for me. This is the target. It's a 20% improvement in energy efficiency, and I will briefly explain what it means. At EU level, the targets simply look at the total primary energy consumption. So the objective is a 20% decrease of energy consumption against a hypothetical business as usual scenario. And long story short, I can tell you that the target has not been reached. In fact, energy consumption in the EU has increased since 2015. It looks like energy savings are not high enough to offset the impact of the growth in economic activity, possibly also due to the delays in implementing effective energy efficiency policy in some member states. I should caution that, of course, there's always a 1.5 to 2 year data gap, and we will have to see the impact of the current COVID crisis in 2020. We can reasonably expect that energy consumption will be impacted by the temporary reduction, hopefully, in economic output. So it may be that artificially for the next few years, energy consumption goes down, but as the economy will pick up again, we have a lot of work to do. The target for 2030 that you can see, this is the red arrow, is set at 32.5%. sorry, this is the bottom line. It will require a major effort to achieve it. So in other words, the 2020 target has not been achieved. Perhaps COVID will change that, and the 2030 target is even more ambitious. So we have a lot of work in front of us. I will now present the main message from an audit we performed last year on eco-design and energy labeling. So this concerns basically the energy efficiency of appliances. I will start with this slide, trying to convince you that we should care about the energy efficiency of household appliances. And this is true for two reasons. First, energy consumption by household is in fact quite significant. It's around a quarter of total energy consumption. Out of that, as you can see on the slide, the vast majority is for space and water heating. Next come the lighting product and the general appliances, and this is your TV and your fridges and whatnot, and finally cooking appliances. The problem is that the source of this energy is often non-renewable. In fact, around 82% of the energy consumed at home comes from non-renewable energy. So what it means in concrete terms is that in many member states, this would be nuclear energy mostly, and in others, it would be fossil fuel. So any energy efficiency gain that we can achieve in these appliances, especially in heating and water heating, will translate into a reduction of CO2. I will now present a few of the basic concepts covered by our audit, and maybe it will be also useful to set the scene. Energy labels and eco-design are complementary policy. They are both managed at the EU level. So essentially the leading role goes to the European Commission, but they are implemented by member states. They cover just about every appliances we commonly use at home: TV, fridges, washing machine, heaters, lamps, plus appliances used for industrial purposes. Energy label, I'm pretty sure you're already familiar with them. In fact, 85% of Europeans recognize the labels. This is, you see an example of a fridge label on the screen, and they use energy label when making a purchase. The labels provide an energy rating on a scale from A to G, and they work simply by helping consumers make informed decisions. They provide you with the energy class, and they tell you more or less how much you can expect your appliance will consume in terms of energy on an average use for 1 year. Eco-design is less known by consumer and less known in general, but it's in fact much more impactful. It's kind of the hidden part of the policy. The eco-design regulation for each product that I've mentioned set minimum energy efficiency requirements. For example, if you want to sell a TV in the EU, let's say, it must consume a maximum of X kilowatt hour. If it consumes more, you cannot sell it anywhere in the EU market. It cannot be imported, it cannot be produced in the EU. You cannot meet the requirement, you cannot sell it. So you can see that it is quite harder than the soft measures that are energy labels. These standards are indeed legally binding, and the goal is essentially to remove the worst product from the EU market. The combined benefits of both the label and the minimum energy efficiency standard, which is eco-design, is very significant. I put some estimate on the slide. I won't go through all of them, but in terms of CO2 reduction, in terms of energy savings, and also in terms of savings for consumers because their energy bill is getting reduced, this is a rather significant policy because it covers such a broad scope of products. Now, one of the main difficulties that we noted in the audit is that setting energy efficiency standard takes a long time. Agreeing on these standards is necessarily complex and a very lengthy process which requires thorough consultations with stakeholders. And on the slide to illustrate this, I put an example, one product group. It represents the policy-making process for TVs and display. It's arguably one of the worst examples, but it shows how complex it is and how long it can take. As you can see, from the start of the process until the end, without going into the detail, it took almost 8 years from the beginning of the process until the end. Now, why is this a problem? Our audit showed that the timeliness of the regulatory process is a key factor in policy success. The problem is that technology moves faster than the legislators. Simply put, when measures are finally adopted, they may only have a very small impact because the technology already has moved forward. So there is no point adopting standard if they don't actually make a difference. In many product groups, technological progress has meant that minimum energy efficiency requirements have become obsolete and that most or all product groups on products model have been on the top energy classes. So you have a choice between A++, A+, or A, for example. It becomes much more difficult for consumers to differentiate between the best and the worst product, and it becomes much less interesting for companies to innovate because they don't benefit from a very good energy rating compared to less innovative products. In our report, we've identified many avoidable delays that would reduce these delays by quite a lot, and we made concrete recommendations for the policymakers at EU level to make this process much faster and much more relevant for fast-moving technology. There is a second challenge that I would like to talk to you about, which is called the rebound effect. So the difficulty is that typically in energy efficiency, and this is why it's a very tricky topic, the gains can be offset by changes in our consumption habits. The summarized version of this issue, the rebound effect, is as follows, and I just put the very simple equation on the slide. Lower energy consumption means that the product that you're buying as a consumer tend to be cheaper to use, and therefore there's an incentive for people to use it or buy it more or buy bigger problem. I'll put two examples on the slide concerning a product covered by the eco-design policy. For example, TVs. Your brand new TV is remarkably more efficient today than the old huge TV that maybe you had 15, 20 years ago. But in parallel of this, the viewing area of TVs and monitors in Europe will more than double in 15 years, between 2015 and 2030. For fridges, it's a very similar story. Energy efficiency has improved by over 60% since 1990s, but at the same time, consumer demand for fridges and freezer will increase by 27% between 2015 and 2030. So whatever gain you made on the left hand, you've lost on the right hand. I added this second slide, which is not about eco-design, but it's about energy efficiency of cars. It's an example from a well-known French energy expert, and I think it illustrates the point very well. So I've decided to show it to you. On the left side, you have a 1950 cars, and on the right side, from the same brand, you have a car from 2008. The point is that by just about all metrics that you can measure, the car on the right, the car from 2008, is much more energy efficient than the car on the left. And yet it consumes more energy. You can see 6 liters per 100 versus 4.5 liters per 100. It's just because it's a completely different car in terms of its performance. If I updated this slide with a car from, let's say, 2018 or 2020, you pretty much all know how the car would look like because you can see it in the street. It would be a big SUV, much bigger, much taller, probably 7 to 9 liters per 100. So not all countries, unfortunately, go the Norwegian route with electric cars. In fact, the biggest selling car segment in the EU is SUVs. So my question to you is this. Policymakers can surely take measures that ensure that consumers are informed. When you buy your car, you know how much it is supposed to consume. Same thing with energy label. They can take measures to set minimum energy efficiency standard. But seeing all of that I've shown to you, I wonder if any of it is useful if you don't also take measures that more forcefully restrict consumer choices. And this is a very politically difficult decision to make. You can have either regulatory restriction. For example, you could say, I don't want to see SUVs anymore, or you can have a market-based instrument, for example, taxation, like the one that you see in Norway. It could be a major energy tax increase or SUV tax, for example. At the end of the day, it's a very difficult balance, a very difficult equilibrium to find. We know that something will need to happen if we want to achieve the objective and mitigate climate change, but it will be very tricky to find a way to do it in a way that is politically and socially acceptable. I will skip this slide in the interest of time, because this slide is about a specific issue, which is compliance with the regulation. And if you are interested, of course, there is a dedicated section in our special report, which is available in all languages on our website. I will now move to the second special report, this time concerning the energy efficiency of buildings. The focus of this audit was on investment to improve building energy efficiency, in particular residential ones. So the buildings, this segment, have the greatest energy consumption in the EU. It's followed by the transport and industry sectors. You can see on the slide that buildings use 42% of on energy, mainly once again for heating and hot water. And energy efficiency improvements, therefore, will lead to lower the emission. Funded energy efficiency investment include insulating buildings, putting good windows, thermal control system, and upgrading heating system. The Commission estimates that to reach the 2030 energy efficiency target, it would require a significant amount of money, some 282 billion euro per year. The EU funds plan 14 billion euros for investment over the last 7 years. 4.6 billion are dedicated to residential building, which was the focus of our audit. We've asked two simple questions during this audit. Are these investments cost effective, and are they actually useful? Are they helping the EU to achieve its targets regarding energy efficiency? There are 3 main conclusions that we believe should be addressed to improve public investment in energy efficiency. First, we noted that money is not the only barriers. In many places, we noticed that there were market barriers preventing the policy to reach its objective that were not linked to money. Well, at least not completely. First, the lack of awareness and expertise on what could be done to improve energy efficiency and what subsidies were available to fund this project was lacking. Second was indeed the high initial cost of the investment, but there were also regulatory barriers such as multi-ownership buildings that could not decide on making the necessary investments because you needed unanimity of the owners, as well as the split incentive of owner-tenant. It's a very well-known problem. It's very hard to convince the owner of a building or the owner of an apartment, of a unit, to invest in energy efficiency improvement when they are not the one benefiting from the reduced energy bills. Second, we noted that aid modulation is key. Considering the budgetary constraint, we believe that subsidies should be reasonable. Lack of modulation implies financing with a very high public aid rate, sometimes up to 100%, very simple upgrades, with quick payback times and very modest unit cost. These are usually financially viable anyway and could be financed without any public support or using financing instrument. So it's not that useful to spend public money on this investment because they could very well be financed without. And finally, maybe the biggest issue of all, targeting. In many places, we noted that these policies are done on a first served basis. So there is no regard for the cost effectiveness of this investment, and cost effectiveness, obviously, in our opinion, should be a major determinant when you give public money, not just who basically applied to get the money first. I'm running a little bit out of my allotted time, so I will go fast on this last slide, just trying to provide you with 2 positive examples that we noted. The first one concerned Italy, where the authority used a competitive call to select projects and applied a criteria to select them related to cost effectiveness of energy saving. This means that in that region, although there were some problems, they had the possibility to prioritize projects delivering the most savings, the most kilowatt hours saved per year for the lower cost, making the euros spent much more effective than on a first-come, first-served basis. And finally, to end up with a bit of good news, I will mention very good practice from Lithuania. On a few examples, I'll try to go to be brief, but first they removed the majority owner rule that was really blocking investment in multi-apartment buildings. They provided 100% fund only to low-income houses. For the rest, the aid was modulated between 15 and 40%, and there was also a loan instrument that allowed you on a 20-year period to have a fixed interest rate of 3%, and they provided this to 4,000 multi-apartment buildings. And finally, we should note that they also offered preferential loan to the lower income earner versus high income earner, which meant that the policy basically targeted the right population, people who did not have the financial means to finance this investment themselves. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry if I ran 2 minutes over my time, and I would be very happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frédéric. Thank you indeed for a very educative explanation on such a complex problem of the energy efficiency. And I believe that data is very important, and it's very important that the society understands the data. It makes them more knowledgeable, and they can take more calculated and wise decisions. We do not have much time for the questions, but still I want to pose one question which comes from the audience. And this question is related to the good practices that you were introducing, but a bit much broader. When it comes to the countries, like for instance, Lithuania, what from your experience and from data could you recommend? What is the most important political decision that countries should take in order to achieve energy efficiency? One or two?
So then I will focus on the buildings, because clearly this is where there is the most potential, and it's mostly about setting the right funding structure. Lithuania have done it very smartly, not giving money away for free, but really selecting the right investment that will bring the most energy saving. What's important to note when you spend on buildings is that this is a growth inducing policy. It's money well spent, because not only you save money for the people benefiting from the investment, you reduce energy poverty, but also all of the works cannot be exported. It has to be done by, say, Lithuanian companies in Lithuania to insulate the house and the buildings. So you really create an ecosystem of energy experts and construction workers that can do this project, and it allows you to leverage a lot of private money as well. So this program can be very effective. Funding is a big issue, but there is no point giving you 1,000, 2,000 euro to change the light bulb or replace a boiler. You need ambitious work that will really make very old building very energy efficient, and that will come at a great benefit for the climate, for the people living in the building, but also for the local economy that will have to do this work. So I think that would be my top priority.
Okay, thank you. And still we have 1 minute, and I have another question coming from the audience. That is a very practical question. Has it been considered to make energy label design based on relative efficiency achievements? How a given product compares to a market average characteristics?
So, I mean, in effect, it is a bit what the energy efficiency label does by having these energy efficiency classes. So basically, A is better than B and B is better than C. The energy label does not provide the average, because that's basically impossible to know. The market changes almost every day. What we see as technology moves faster is that basically there's only available on the market very top energy classes, which make it more difficult for people to make informed choices. And because there is no money on the energy label, only kilowatt hour of consumption, it can be difficult for consumer to translate the average energy consumption of the product into what it will cost them every year. And the very last point I would like to make is that these energy labels compare product of the same category. So even if you compare two TVs, which can be quite confusing, if you buy the big TV with an A rating, it may very well consume more energy than a smaller TV with a C rating. And that can be quite confusing. Unfortunately, there is some information campaign that need to try to educate the sellers and also the buyers. But at the end of the day, it's the point that I was making. We tend to see that the product consumes less energy, and we buy a second fridge to put in the garage, and we buy a bigger TV and we put one in the bedroom as well. So in other words, sometimes the total effect is not so good. But the label theoretically contains all of the information that you would need to take an informed decision. It may not lead you to do it.